So today we're going to be talking about Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 CE, and was known as one of the good emperors of the second century. Her son, Commodus, was a disaster, according to most sources. And as most would agree, he ruled during an era of transition. For during his reign, Rome faced the threat of a revitalized Parthian Empire attacking from the east, and the threat of German barbarians attacking all along the northern frontier, the Rhine and the Danube. Meanwhile, a great plague spread across the empire, killing thousands to the point of depopulating entire cities. Marcus Aurelius faced these threats directly and resolutely, known for his wisdom and his great piety. For after all, he was viewed not only as an emperor, but as a philosopher as well, devoted to the philosophical practice known as Stoicism, which gave him the fortitude to meet these challenges. He even wrote a work known as the Meditations, considered one of the greatest works of the Western world. So let us take a look at Marcus Aurelius and the philosophy that really made him a success as a Roman emperor. So let's start the first image. So Marcus Aurelius, he was born in 121 CE. His family was from Roman Spain, originating in Eucubi. This is a picture of it today. It's a small town that's southeast of Cordoba in Iberian Bactica. He's from the Gen Ani, who, according to Cassius Dio, were near kin of the Emperor Hadrian. And so one of the reasons why he was selected to be adopted by him, and of course, the other being his connection to him via his wife's family. Let's take a look at Hadrian right here. Hadrian, of course, had his, the next picture, please. Hadrian, of course, had his successor, Antonius Pius, adopted. In fact, he had Antonius Pius adopt both Marcus Aurelius. So where was I? Following his father's death in 124 CE, his paternal grandfather, Marcus Annius Verus, adopted Marcus, who, according to his meditations, taught him good character and avoidance of bad temper. I guess we'll go ahead and finish that image there. Marcus Aurelius was adopted when, by the way, he was a mere 16 years of age, pretty young. From an early age, Marcus Aurelius was prone towards virtue, and Dio believes he owed his advancement to his own natural gifts. For even before he associated with those teachers, he had a strong impulse towards virtue. Indeed, says Cassius Dio, while still a boy, he so pleased all his relatives, who were numerous, influential, and wealthy, that he was loved by them all. At around 12, Marcus began his advanced education under first somebody by the name of Andro, who he calls in his personal philosophical work known as the Meditations, a geometrician as well as a musician. And then next, he also was taught by Diogenetus, said to be a painting master. But Marcus did not think of him as a mere painter, but as the teacher who introduced him to philosophy. Marcus writes in his Meditations that Diogenetus taught him, quote, to avoid passing enthusiasms, to distrust the stories of miracle workers and impostors about incantations and exorcisms of spirits and such things. Not to go cockfighting or to get excited about such sports, to put up with outspokenness and to become familiar with philosophy, unquote. As well as, he says later, to write philosophical dialogues during the time of my boyhood. So he is writing already about, as a child, philosophical works. At the request of Diognetus, Marcus decided on April of 132 CE to officially become a philosopher. And from that point on, studied in a rough Greek, very humble cloak. As for his idea about sleeping on the ground to really show how detached to comforts he was becoming, little Marcus Aurelius is going, hey, I want to sleep on the ground. I'm not going to sleep on a bed. Show how tough I am. Show my strength and my fortitude. Cassius Steele notes, his mother told him he had to sleep in his bed while under her supervision. So he's a very eager philosopher. As also noted by Dio, one of his tutors was the Greek grammarian and leading Homeric scholar of his day by the name of Alexander of Cotinum, who directly followed Andro and Diognetus. He was his teacher around 133. Now, Alexander was also the tutor of the famous orator from Asia Minor by the name of Aelius Aristides, who pronounced him as one of the best, actually, great oracle masters. He had other ones too. Now, with Alexander, he trained Marcus in literary styling and told him that the material itself was always more important than flaunting one's style. It's not it's not about bombastic displays of literary gymnastics. It's all about content. Of course, we're entering an age where sophists are arguing back and forth and using too many words to impress and to flatter various patrons. So he's saying, no. Strip it down, be simple, be clear, be direct, but still write well. Marcus began his oratorical training in Greek. And then, of course, the idea would be, and we'll see this later on, Marcus Aurelius considers Greek as, in many ways, a superior language because more can be expressed in Greek than in Latin, at least from his point of view. Finally, he is introduced to the man who is going to bring in Stoicism as his main belief. That's a certain Cornelius Fronto. So when Fronto came to Rome, he trained in law, oratory, and rhetoric. He eventually became quite wealthy. And soon Antonius Pius appointed Fronto to tutor Marcus Aurelius. By the way, Fronto also served as a consul in 142, but he only lasted 2 months there. He most likely died as a result of the Great Plague during the time of Antonius Pius. There's another one that will come a little bit later. So this is the beginning. So now Marcus Aurelius is immersed in Stoicism. And that brings us to wonder exactly what Stoicism is. So let's go into it. The Stoics, let's go to the first image. So the Stoics believed that all being, though not all things, is material. They accepted the distinction between concrete bodies and abstract ones, but rejected Aristotle's belief that purely incorporeal being exists. They held that there are 4 categories characterizing all things. Number 1, you have its substance, which is the primary matter. This is the formless substance, ousia, that things are made of. So there's a substance that everything is made out of. And this is the intrinsic reality. This is ousia. Next, number 2, you have the quality. The quality is the way matter is organized to form an individual object. In Stoic physics, a physical ingredient which informs the matter will include, for example, pneuma or air or breath. Number 3, it's very interesting. It has some particular characteristics, not within the object, but something that forms it, such as size, shape, action, and posture. And number four, finally, somehow it is related to something, characteristic related to some other phenomena, such as the position of an object within time and space relative to other objects. As you can see from this chart here, it's not exactly the most easy idea to have down. So so let's take this image down. I know it's giving many of you guys a headache. In epistemology, the Stoics believed that knowledge may be reached through reason. You see, truth can be distinguished from fallacy, even if in practice only an approximation can be made. So you see, according to the Stoics, the senses are constantly receiving these sensations. These are like pulsations that pass from the objects through the senses and to the mind, where they leave an impression in the imagination, a fantasia. So, in fact, an impression arising from the mind was called a phantasma. So, it's a fantasia. So, you are impressed. Hey, hence, as the saying goes, one can be literally impressed. Yeah, maybe I'm making a good impression here. See, impression, see how these ideas. It's fun tracing these concepts, is it not? Right? So he believed that Stoics beliefs can be that the mind has the ability to judge, it can improve it or disprove a impression that comes to it, enabling it to distinguish a true representation of a reality as well as distinguish a false representative of reality. So some impressions could be believed, right away, immediately, but others only achieve a degree of hesitant approval. So when it is in this in-between area, so obviously the immediate ideas, this is water, it's wet. Okay, but we get to a point of ideas, right? The realm of then we go into the area of belief as well as opinion, doxa, right? So at this point, it is only through reason that we can achieve comprehension and what is understood as a conviction of that this is indeed true, katalepsis, right, in Greek. So there is such thing as certain and true knowledge achieved even in this area of this realm of opinion ideas. After a while, we can shake it about and get to the real reality of its truth, right? There is true knowledge, episteme. And so many of those who are the Stoic sages are believed to be able to get to this point. Now, how do we get to this point? Well, it's by verifying the conviction with the expertise of one's peers and the collective judgment of humankind. To the point, it is the consensus of thought. So, this realm of opinion, if enough of those who are considered wise have this opinion and it seems to be true in the realm of ideas, even to a certain point, this is, of course, part of the process that's important to verify this knowledge. This is the essence and background of a scholastic idea that many academics hold, and that's called, you guys ever heard of peer review? Where a collection of academics check and counter check and so forth a person's work through the realm of expertise. So this is where these ideas come from. Wow, we're unpacking a lot in a short amount of time. Now, the later part of the 1st century BCE, a certain Diocles the Magnesian as quoted by Diogenes Laertius, he ascribes this idea in Stoicism as one of first presentation. First is presentation, and then there is sensation. So first is presentation. So the Stoics, he says, agreed to put in the forefront the doctrine of presentation and sensation, inasmuch as the standard by which the truth of things is tested is generically a presentation. So this is the testing. And again, the theory of assent and that of apprehension and thought, which precedes all the rest, cannot be studied apart from presentation. For presentation comes first, then thought, which is capable of expressing itself, putting into the form of a proposition that which the subject receives from a presentation. So you're going into this realm of, yeah, it's presented, but now it's a proposition. It's a proposition. Is it true? Is it not true? Where do we go with this? Diogenes Laertius asserts there is a difference between the process and the outcome of a presentation. The latter, which is the outcome, is a semblance in the mind, such as may occur in sleep, while the former is an act of imprinting something on the soul. That is the process of change, right? So what happens here is Chrysippus, the famous Stoic, says we must not take impression in the literal sense of the stamp of a seal, because it is impossible to suppose the number of such impressions could be in one and the same spot at one and the same time. The presentation meant is that which comes from a real object, agrees with that object, and has been stamped, imprinted, and pressed seal fashion on the soul, as would not be the case if it came from an unreal object. So you do have this intellectual process that must take place, right? So there is this idea of deciding also between that which is rational and that which is irrational, right? The former being those of rational creatures, the latter being those of irrational. Those which are rational are processes of thought, which those which are irrational have no name. So sometimes the irrational moves on instinct as opposed to thinking. Once again, this kind of ties in with modern thought too. It's the idea of fight, flight, and freeze responses, right? And the idea is that this is the realm of the irrational. Sometimes it is rational to follow those ideas, but it's still, it's an impulse. It's an instinct almost. But the idea is what you're supposed to do as a Stoic is when something happens, you're supposed to take this all in and think and make a wise choice based upon knowledge, episteme. So when things are being thrown at you, right? And, you feel like you got to fight it. Stoics say, think first. And if you need to fight it, then you will. If instinct tells you to run away, Stoics say, think about it first, and then you'll decide it. And if you freeze, Stoicism believes that through meditation, you're not going to freeze. In fact, you're going to contemplate and think to yourself what you should do. It's all about knowledge. So that's important. Again, he'll talk about the ideas of that some of these ideas, at all events, a statue is viewed in a totally different way by the trained eye by a sculptor, as Chrysippus says, and a different way by an ordinary man. So this also goes into this other realm that if you don't have knowledge and you look at an object, it doesn't. You're not informed. You don't appreciate it. Now, how many of us have seen a painting by an artist, and you think to yourself, it's okay. And then you learn about how it was made, who made it, the story, the meaning, the symbolism. And all of a sudden you look at that same painting and you go, wow. You guys got it? You guys got it, don't you? Right? That's exactly it. So the idea is knowledge gives us a deeper, richer perspective of things, a sense of criticism, that's true, but also a deeper sense of appreciation if we decide to dive into it, right? So that is very important, okay? Now, What happens, of course, is that this ability enables us to apprehend that which is black or white, rough or smooth. Reason decides on this, right? Also sometimes we get to the truth via analogy. So this happens this way. Now, according to the Stoics, let's go to the next image. The universe is material. It is actually a material reasoning substance known as God or nature, which the Stoics divide into two classes, the active and the passive. The passive substance is matter, which lies sluggish, a substance ready for any use, but sure to remain unemployed if no one sets it in motion. The active substance is called fate or universal reason, or they will use the word the logos. And maybe you're having the idea of the word. So you're probably already going, oh, wow, Christianity. Okay, this is interesting. Obviously, this idea goes back to Heraclitus of Ephesus, this idea of using the word the logos or the word. It goes back further too. But Heraclitus, of course, will have this as part of this this primordial kind of aspect that creates all things. And then later on, Plato gets a hold of it and it becomes the demiurge. And then it goes back in Middle Platonism, it goes into the Logos again. In Stoicism, it is the Logos, and that's kind of it. But by the way, and during the same period of time, during the first century, for example, John would use the word Logos, and he's connecting this idea to both Platonism as well as Stoic ideas. So here it is. So universal reason, or the Logos, this is an intelligent ether. It is also known as the primordial fire, which acts on the passive matter. So according to Chrysippus, the famous Stoic, one of the founding fathers of Stoicism, he states, the universe itself is God and the universal outpouring of its soul. It is this same world's guiding principle, operating in mind and reason, together with the common nature of things and the totality that embraces all existence. Then the foreordained might and necessity of the future, then fire and the principle of ether, then those elements whose natural state is one of flux and transition, so it goes down, such as water and earth and air, and then the sun, the moon, the stars, and the universal existence of which all things are contained. What he's describing here, of course, is this idea of emanation. So the Logos is active. It is universal reason. It's the intelligent ether. It's the primordial fire, right? This is what gives us the spark of life that is intelligent. It's human, it's animal, and it acts upon the material, the passive material. So you can see all these ideas jumping out, right? Everything is subject to the laws of fate, for the universe acts according to its own nature. And the nature of the passive matter, it also governs. The souls of people and animals are emanations from this primordial fire and are likewise subject to fate. Now, Marcus Aurelius does comment on this in the Meditations. So already we're kind of bringing him in here. He says, constantly regard the universe as one living being, having one substance and one soul, and observe how all things have reference to one perception, the perception of this one living being, and how all things act with one movement, and all things are the cooperating causes of all things that exist. Observe too the continuous spinning of the thread and the structure of the web. Wow. I mean, beautifully, beautifully said. Thank you, Marcus Aurelius, right? So you have this idea. I love this idea of this web. We could see my face a little bit, but you get the idea. So you have the universe is this web of life, connected to all things. The universe is alive. It's animate. It's very much animistic on so many different levels, right? So then God is one and is the same as reason. And as Diogenes Laertius says, it's also the same as fate and Zeus. In fact, Laertius goes on, he says, also called by many other names. In the beginning, he was by himself. He transformed the whole substance through air into water. And just as in animal generation, the seed has a moist vehicle, so in the cosmic moisture, God, who is the seminal reason of the universe, remains behind in the moisture as such an agent, adapting matter to himself with a view to the next stage of creation. Thereupon, he created, first of all, the four elements: fire, water, air, earth, right? Which constitute, of course, matter. Fire, of course, is the hot element, water, the moist, air, the cold, and earth, the dry. He continues, the term universe or cosmos is used in many different ways, of course. I'll kind of outline this: of God himself, the individual being whose quality is derived from the whole substance. He is indestructible, ingenerable, being the artificer of this orderly arrangement, who at the stated periods of time absorbs into himself the whole of substance and again creates it from himself. The world, in their view, then, is ordered by reason and by the concept that you'll hear often, the idea of providence. The world, they say, is one and finite, being spherical in shape, such as a shape being the most suitable for motion. So the world is circular, it is round, right? And everything is bound through this sympathy, through this tension, which binds together the things of the heavens and the earth. Time, too, is incorporeal, being the measurement of the world motion, right? Right? Everything is put together. However, the Stoics believe that while the world is created and generated, it is also perishable. It's constant transformation. The world in itself is doomed to perish. But, however, when it dissolves, it will be rebuilt again and going on and on and on. So, because the world is a living being, rational, animate, and intelligent at the same time, while it seems to die, it will come back. They believe, of course, that the stars, some are fixed, some are not, like the wandering planets, right? Which I think is interesting. He also talks about, of course, sorry, Stoics also talk about the fact that I'm putting something here interesting. There's quite a few interesting bits and pieces here. Oh, also they hold that there are daemons, these spirits who are in sympathy with humanity and watch over human affairs. So they believe in gods, they believe in these daemons, these higher spirits, and they also believe in heroes too, the souls of the righteous that have survived in the bodies. Oh, here it is. I found an interesting quote from ancient times. We're going to go anyway. So the idea is the earth is in the middle, answered to a center. So next comes water, which is shaped like a sphere all around it, concentric with the earth. So the earth has in it water. Then, of course, after the water comes the spherical layer of air. And there are 5 celestial circles. First, you have, now get this. This is the Stoics believe this. Now remember, this is Roman times. It's 2,000 years ago. And let's look at the celestial circles of the earth. The first they call the Arctic Circle, which is always visible. Second, you have the which I think is interesting, which is the one. Second, you have the summer tropic. Third, the circle of the equinox. Fourth, the winter tropic. And fifth, the Antarctic, which is visible to us. Is that interesting to you guys? So they talk about these ideas. In fact, They talk about the zodiac is also an oblique circle as it crosses the parallel circles. And there are 5 terrestrial zones that connect to these. The first, they say, is the northern zone, which is beyond the Arctic Circle. It's uninhabitable, they say, because of the cold. Second, the temperate zone. A third, uninhabitable because of the great heats. So third, uninhabitable because of the great heats, called the torrid zone. Fourth, the counter-temperate zone. Fifth, the southern zone, uninhabitable because of its cold. It sounds like they kind of know. Not only do we have a round Earth, but they also have described the various levels of the Earth when it comes from the Arctic to the Antarctic to the equinox area, so the equator. So I don't know. I find this very interesting. Let's go to the next image. Let's go to ethics. As for their ethics, the Stoics did not seek to extinguish emotions. Rather, they sought to transform them by resolute ascesis that enables a person to develop clear judgment and inner calm. Logic, reflection, and concentration were methods of self-discipline. And so let's take a look at some of these ideas. Let's go to the bottom of the chart. So basically, you have this idea of ascesis. So this is training and exercise. Hardship and problems are seen as practices for self-knowledge and self-mastery. So ascesis, you're going through this exercise of oneself in order for you to, so you're taking your challenges, you're taking these hurdles, and you're learning from it. But also, in many cases, ascesis is connected to the act of meditation, this autarkia, right? The self-mastery, because you're trying to master your physical self. You're trying to master, put your mind over everything else. Ascesis will also be used throughout Middle Platonic thought. Ascesis will be used also, for example, by Clement of Alexandria, who is a Christian Middle Platonist. The idea this is the first step moving to deification. You still got to go through ascesis, this common practice. And so the big thing that you're trying to discipline is desire. So it's the idea of disciplining this desire, the practice of acceptance, living in harmony with the laws of nature, right? So, and this moves to the one of the 4 pillars of virtue for for Stoics, and that is courage. Okay, courage is this, right? So you guys got it. The next one is take a look over here. I'm going to go kind of not in the same order, but it's proche. This, of course, is this idea here of attention to the present moment, that you should always be here and now in mindset. You should always be thinking about what's going on at this immediate moment. Not the future, not the past always. You should know that. Obviously, that shouldn't chain you, but that shouldn't chain you down. You still got to be really aware at this moment. What will happen is many Stoics say that so many are lost in thoughts of the past. And what it does is it makes them not live in this moment or even in the future. But you got to be aware of what's going on here and now. So this means you have to constantly have self-examinations of the impressions, desires, and actions. Once again, we talked about impressions and what that means. You need to have critical thought in this area. And mindfulness, constant mindfulness. We talked about this earlier. This is the way where you don't go into the fight, flight, and freeze response. You got to really think about things first. This will then be connected to the discipline of assent. So you see the impressions, the real impressions over the false impressions. And this leads to the virtue, one of the 4 cardinals known as temperance. The next one is oikosis. Okay, oikosis is best way is a sense of belonging. This need that we're not alone in this journey, that we need to widen our circle. And that we need to, yes, have concern for ourselves, but we should also have concern for others, to relatives, to the community, to humanity. It's not just all about you. I know it's not just about your transformation, your deification, if you come from a mystical tradition. It's about bringing everybody else in. There's a feeling, almost a Buddhist feeling, almost a bodhisattva-like feeling of bringing everybody in, right? Helping others, seeing the bigger vision. And of course, this leads to a discipline of action, seeking the common good. And obviously, the common good means that since you have more people, that means it is connected to the virtue known as justice, right? And then finally, of course, you had the eudaimonia. You said the well, EU, daimonia. This is, of course, human flourishing, happiness, a good flow of life. So the idea is, yeah, it's important to have happiness, the act of living well in accordance with nature. So this is another step. So it's not just with society. It's not just within society. It moves beyond that into nature, into the natural realm, right? And this leads, of course, to the idea of proheris, which is, of course, the capacity for making good and wise choices, right? And of course, that means that the virtue of wisdom. So the virtue of wisdom, the pillar of wisdom connects to this. So once again, the four pillars of the virtues are courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. By the way, wisdom then leads on to arete, okay, which is, of course, we'll unpack in a little bit. Isn't that interesting, right? So there you have it. Okay, let's see me for a second there. So let's talk about, of course, obviously, virtue. This is the perfection of anything in general. It may be non-intellectual like health or intellectual like prudence. But I really want to go to the next idea. Good in general is from which some advantage comes or arrives. And more in particular, what is either identical with or not distinct from benefit. Whence it follows that virtue itself and whatever partakes of virtue is called that which is good. And it is understood, good is understood in a few different ways, three different ways. First of all, it is the source from which benefit results. So there's benefits that result. Last I checked, that's probably a good thing. That in respect of which benefits results, so it's a virtuous act in and of itself, and by the agency of which benefit results. So you have these ideas placed together. So what will happen is that you have this concept. Let's go to the next image. You have this idea that what is moral and ethical is beautiful. It is also therefore good. Good comprises the virtues, as I noted, of prudence, justice, courage, temperance, as well as the rest. But one should not be morally indifferent. Now, the idea of being indifferent has different meanings. In the first, it means the things which do not contribute either to happiness or misery, as wealth, fame, health, strength, and the like. For it is possible to be happy without having these, although if they are used in a certain way, such use of them tends to happiness or misery. In quite another sense, those things are said to be indifferent, which are without the power of stirring inclination or specifically aversion, right? Now, accordingly, fear is an expectation of evil. Under fear, arrange the following emotions: terror, nervous, shrinking, shame, consternation, panic, and mental agony. So these are these ideas. A resentment is anger in an earlier stage. Pleasure is an irrational elation accruing from what seems to be choice worthy. There's also emotional states which are good, namely joy, caution, and wishing are all good ideas. They are also, what will happen here is that, take a look here. So you can see here, You have nature, you have choices, and you have the virtues and you have the good, which we talked about, virtuous choices. What is interesting is in Stoicism, you have this idea that there is that which is evil. There is that which is bad. Which is bad is what obstructs one from doing what is ethically good, that gets in the way of the virtues. And included here, of course, are the vicious, these negative externals. Let's, for fun, go to to the next image. Okay, so what leads to is ideas that there are things that we can control, and there are things that we cannot control. We've got to be happy with the things, or at least understand with a sense of serenity, a serenity of passion, that there are things that we can indeed have power over. For example, your response to other people's behavior, right? We have that power. How we speak to and treat others, where you give your time, your energy, your attention, right? That's important, right? That's under your control. When or if, right? To forgive others, or how you let other people affect you, or setting boundaries. These are things that you can control. This is Stoicism 101. Stoics agree with these central ideas. There are things that are within your power, but you also have to realize there is fate. There is something outside of yourself that doesn't always work out. Now, you can work on these areas, but what about things you can't control? What others think of you? That's, you can control that to a certain extent, but ultimately you don't have control over that. Does that make sense? I'm not saying there's not qualifications where you can influence what other people think of you, but still, ultimately, you can't get in their minds and change it. They have to judge for themselves, not you. It's through their process. It's through their presentation and how they understand those impressions. I'm using the Stoic language here. So what others say about you, maybe you can influence it, you can try, but ultimately you don't have, ultimately we can't control what people say. Hopefully we can influence them in a positive way, but you know what? We, again, don't have control ultimately of their mental faculties. What happens around you, the attitudes of others, the belief and perception of others. This is the big one, especially when it comes to this age of religion and politics coming together, the big time, right? People's beliefs. You can argue and pontificate and do your apologetics and anything you want. It's still their decision whether to be swayed one way or the others. Here we talked about this earlier. The past, right? You can't control the past. It's done. A lot of people want to do that. They will revise it and change it in their own minds, but it's still there. The future, sure, you can in within yourself, you can try, but ultimately, the future has it's on its own. You can do your best. You can absolutely influence the outcome to a certain extent, but you do not have the control. Only you yourself. Other people's boundaries, if others forgive you, right? Big one. How others react, how others behave, how others feel. Whew. So Stoicism is all about that, right? Let's go to the next image. Next image, of course, is yes, not to get things thrown off, but yes, you still have to put yourself first to a degree, because you got to be you in order to relate to these other kinds of ideas. You still got to be you. So you can't jump and be just, be of your friends or your community or all humanity. You have to know yourself. You have to do meditation. You have to have these practices of understanding who you really are, so that you can, as you, relate to your family, then as you relate to your friends, and then community, then all humanity, and then to the earth. You still got to go through the process of, where we go again, ascesis. right? You still got to practice this meditation to understand, because otherwise it's going to be somebody else, some other presentation that of what you think people want you to be, that's related to family, friends, community, and all humanity. It's not going to work. It goes against it. So yes, even though the Stoics stress the idea of bringing everybody together, holding all ties, and this network and everything else, you still got to know who you are along the way. You got to know your individual job profile in the universal lattice work of all things, how they interact with each other. You still got to know your part in the play, your part within this theater that is life. You got to know your part, and you got to know your part well and your lines really well, and have your characterization down pat before you go to the others. And this is the biggest mistake people do, is not to validate oneself. It's not selfish to understand yourself. You got to understand yourself so you know who of yourself to give to others. Does that make sense? You guys got it? All right. I think you're understanding Stoicism pretty well. Let's go to the next image. Yes. So basically, you embody virtues as the ultimate good, right? Then you master your desires. Then you foster wisdom and rational self-examination as cases. Then you practice mindfulness and tranquility, the serenity of passion. Then, of course, you internalize your goals, and then resilience in the face of adversity, practicing purposeful discomfort, because you got to challenge yourself, and refraining from worrying about the uncontrollable. We talked about that now, as right. We're going to review here, and diffusing anger, right? So you have all these ideas down pat, because this is the essentials. This is what makes Marcus Aurelius. And the last one you can't see here is cultivating Stoic joy. So joy is the ultimate goal. Wow, happiness. There it is. So let's go to the next one. Of course, where did these ideas come from? Oh, I should mention this one too. I'm sorry. These are the pillars. So we talked about these already briefly, but I guess we'll go here just for a few moments. Okay, so the pillars are as follows right here. Give me a second here. You have, of course, here wisdom, right? We talked about this, but let's go a little bit deeper. This is the ability which by itself is productive of human happiness, right? So wisdom, chronesis, right? It's the knowledge of what is good. It is also the knowledge of what is bad. It is the disposition by which we judge what is to be done, but it is also what is not to be done. Now, it's interesting. Next one. Next one is dikaiosune, or justice. This is the state that distributes to each person according to what is deserved. The state underlying a law-abiding way of life, but intrinsically part of this is that justice has within it this idea of social equality. I find that fascinating. And of course, the state of obedience to the laws. The next, of course, is moderation. So phrosyne, right? Moderation of the soul concerning the desires and pleasures that normally occur in it. It is a good discipline of the soul, the state by which its possession chooses and is cautious about who it should, right? Courage, finally, Andrea. This is the state of the soul that is unmoved by fear. Obviously, it is the obedience, boldness, and the obedience of wisdom. You got to be courageous. You got to be strong about to defend wisdom. You got to stand your ground, being intrepid in the face of death, and of course, force of fortitude and respect of virtue. And of course, you have arete there. Let's go to the next one. Arete, I want to mention this is a picture I took at Ephesus. Arete is immortalized here. Stoics believe that wisdom or pronesis, in some cases they'll have Sophia, is the road ultimately of the four pillars to what is called arete. This is excellence of any kind. It's a full realization of the potential. It is the having the main virtue in a sense. So it is all things transcend to this concept of arete. And so, but it is, even though you may have justice, moderation, and courage, it is only through wisdom that you can achieve the highest good of all. Got it? It's only through wisdom. Good. Let's go to the next image. So we do have some major thinkers here. Stoicism, Cleanthes and Zeno and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. Let's go over a few of these together. The first one is Zeno. Let's go to the next image. So here's Zeno. Okay, Zeno of Citium. He originated from the island of Cyprus and was the most likely of Phoenician descent. Diogenes Laertius describes Zeno as follows. He had a wry neck, says Timotheus of Athens in his book on lives. Moreover, Apollonius of Tyre says he was lean, fairly tall, and swarthy, hence someone would call him an Egyptian vine branch. He had thick legs. He was flabby and delicate. He said that he was fond of eating green figs and of basking in the sun. Oh, let's look at me for a little bit. Basking in the sun. I love it. I mean, one thing about the ancients, thank you for that, is they love giving you too much information. So he was a pupil of Crates. They say that what he did is he attended his lectures. Actually, he attended, first of all, the lectures of Stilpo and a certain Xenocrates. He did this for about 10 years. And then, of course, what he did is he consulted an oracle to know how he should attain the best life. And that the god's response, according to the story, is that he should take on the complexion of the dead. That's a very strange thing, take on the complexion of the dead. Well, whereupon he perceived this as he must study ancient authors. And I'm glad he didn't do any necromancy at that point. So he studied ancient authors. Now, the way he came across Crates was as follows. He was shipwrecked on a voyage from Phoenicia to Piraeus with a cargo laden full of purple. So he went, this is, of course, the purple dye that will be used for luxurious items, right? Very lucrative. He went up, so he shipwrecked. So he went up to Athens and sat down in a bookseller's shop. I can't think of a better place to sit down and hang out. Yes, they had bookshops in those days. Now, he was then about 30 years of age. As he went on reading the second book of Xenophon's Memorabilia, he was so pleased that he inquired where men like Socrates were to be found. Crates passed by in the nick of time, it says, and so the bookseller pointed to him and said, "Follow yonder man." So we're looking at this. So he's going to go ahead and do just that. From that day on, he became Crates' pupil, showing other respects a strong bent for philosophy. But he was too native with his modesty to assimilate the cynic shamelessness that Crates had at that time. In fact, there's a story. I guess I got to tell you the lentil soup story. One day, Crates, desiring curing his defect of constantly feeling shameful of doing various things, he gave him a pot full of lentil soup to carry through the area. And when he saw that he was ashamed, he tried to keep it out of sight. The fact that, and so what he did is because he didn't want to be carrying around soup. He thought it was just like beneath him. So what Crates does, not only is he holding this pot of lentil soup, then Crates, what he does is he breaks the pot in the guy's hand, and it goes all over him. He hit him he hit the pot with the staff, and so what happened is Zeno took flight with the lentil soup flowing down his legs, and Crates says, "Why run away, my little Phoenician? Nothing terrible has befallen you." I know this is what nothing. What? Well, he's messy. I mean, he's got lentil soup all over him. He's embarrassed by the fact. But what happens here is Crates is saying, "Really? Just a little spill? You're worried about whatever people think? You're worried about, other people's opinion of yourself? You're worried about whether you're, looking messy or not? Aren't there bigger things going on? Is this such a big deal? You've gone through it. Now move through it. Transcend as a result." That makes any sense. So tell them to relax. So what happened is Zeno used to discourse, pacing up and down in the painted colonnade, which they call the colonnade or the portico Pisonix. Zeno eventually was, as a person, he was kind of a sour and frowning person. He didn't seem very happy, but Zeno was the founder of Stoicism. He outlined, for example, the general cosmology. He's the one who talked about the active and passive principles of the universe that we talked about. He taught that God is one and the same with reason, fate, and Zeus. He's the one who brought together the idea of the four elements that are being involved with the whole process. So he talks about how the world was finite and would be destroyed someday, right? And so he's the one who came up that life is to be agreement with nature. So in other words, a large portion of the main principles was put together by Zeno. Let's go to the next image. The next teacher, although his nose is a little bit broken here, is Cleanthes of Assos. This guy was originally a boxer, and I'm kind of thinking right now, I know his nose is chipped, but I wonder if it was already flattened by another boxer anyway. He came to Athens, but at the time he only had 4 drachmas on him. And of course, he did attach himself to Zeno. Let's take a look. This is where he's from. By the way, Assos is next image. Assos is just an incredibly beautiful town. So there you go. There it is. That's where it looks. Why leave? Go to Athens, right? So I've been in this general area right here, but beautiful, worth visiting. Okay, let's see my face a little bit. Thank you so much, Margie. So he was especially he was a very poor man, but he was forced to undertake various mercenary employments. For example, he used to draw water in various gardens by night. I mean, somebody has to keep people's gardens watered. And according to ancient wisdom, which of course connects to our wisdom, is that when do you do the watering of the gardens? You do it at night, not during the day, because that burns the plants. So he was the night gardener. So he's up all night doing this, right? And by day, he used to exercise himself in philosophical discussions. So by night, he's watering people's gardens. By day, he's doing philosophy. In fact, one time he was brought before a court of justice to be compelled to give an account of what his sources of income were, because people wondering how he's able to survive and be involved in philosophy all day. It's like the poor guy, he's working all night. That's how he's doing it. But, people don't see him, so they don't see it. So what happens is they find out what he does, and the judges of the Areopagus admired him and voted that 10 minae should be given to him. But Zeno, his teacher, says, no, you can't accept it. I know, what a killjoy. No wonder. Oh, good grief. Cleanthes came up with the theory of tension, which made it very clear that Stoicism would view matter as dynamic rather than dead and inert. And at the same time helped define further from Zeno more of a pantheistic worldview. While Zeno had God, had this larger universe idea, it is Cleanthes that really adds this pantheistic connection, this web of life. Cleanthes also further asserts that the soul was actually a material substance that pervaded this universe. Cleanthes regarded the sun as being divine, and he maintained that pleasure is not only not a good, but is contrary to nature and worthless. So a little darker there, but there you have it. Well, I mean, poor guy didn't have any sleep, right? Okay, let's get to the next image. I'm sorry. We have, of course, now we have next image is Chrysippus Soli. He was a native either of Soli or Tarsus. He was a man of, next image. He was a man of great natural ability. He was very industrious, being all men. And so there's the image of him. Thank you so much, Margie. Very industrious. Well, how industrious? Well, he wrote a lot. In fact, you know how many books this guy wrote? He wrote, according to ancient sources, more than 705 books. So more than 705 books. That's a lot of books. He was pretty busy. In fact, he wrote many books often on the same topics, on the same subjects, wishing to put everything down that occurred to him. And what he did is constantly correct his previous assertions and using lots of testimonial. In fact, the problem is he used so many testimonials. He got to the point where he wanted to quote everybody in order to support his idea. And his idea was to quote everybody in context. So it got to the point where, are we reading his works or are we reading the other people's works at the same time? so that Laertius says, so that as in one of his writings, he had quoted very nearly the whole of the Medea of Euripides. And someone had his book in his hands. This person said that when asked what he had got there, he made this answer. He says, well, I guess I have the Medea according to Chrysippus. He just covered quoted him. So there you are. So what happens is that he was, of course, a great philosopher, but he was also he also enjoyed drinking quite a bit. At drinking parties, he used to behave quietly. However, he moved his legs about constantly, and so it came to the point where a female slave once said, "It is only the legs of Chrysippus that are drunk." So what he did, of course, is in many ways is he brought the idea that the existence of God he focused on. If there's anything that humanity cannot produce, the being who produces it is better than humanity. But humanity cannot produce the things that are in the universe, the heavenly bodies, etc. The being, therefore, who produces them is superior to humanity. But who is there that is superior to humanity except for God? Therefore, he makes the supposition, then God exists according to Chrysippus. That's his idea. And of course, Chrysippus spoke of God as well as the gods as being interchangeable. He interpreted the gods of the traditional Greek religion by viewing them as different aspects of one reality. So Cicero tells us that He further maintained that ether is that which people call Zeus, and that the air which permeates the seas is Poseidon, and that the earth is what is known by the name of Demeter. And he treated similar style the names of the other gods, so they're connected to all these things. That's his special gift. Then, of course, the next one, let's go to the next image, is Diogenes. He was a native Sinope. His son of Hecisius, a banker. He went to exile because his father was entrusted with the money of the state and adulterated or altered the coinage, although some people said that Diogenes did it himself. So there it is. And so what happened is that he eventually went to Athens, and he never really welcomed pupils for a while. But he was known as to see or scorn the material world in general. In fact, through watching a mouse running about, says Theophrastus in the Megarian dialogue, not looking for a place to lie down, not afraid of the dark, not seeking any of the things which are considered to be dainties. He discovered the means of adapting himself to the circumstances. He was the first, some say, to fold his cloak because he was obliged to sleep in it as well. And he carried a wallet to hold his various things. So he used any place for any purpose, for breakfast or sleeping or conversing. Yeah, so the idea is ultimately you shouldn't be attached to the material world. It is not that important. It is, of course, passing away. So we're getting this stronger ideal here that the material world is not as important. Okay, so that's Diogenes. So let's go to the next image. Okay, so this is we're going to Pantadius. I won't talk too much about him. It's a little blurry there. He talked about morality should be focused upon without qualification, without first gaining knowledge or wisdom. Let's go to the next image. You also have Posidonius of Apamea. He's the one who underlined the idea of cosmic sympathy. This guy would be a lecture in and of itself. Let's go to the next image. Yeah, so let's go to Epictetus. Epictetus, he was, of course, that the foundation of all philosophy he taught was self-knowledge. This would be a talk in of itself. Let's go to his quote, famous quote here, next image. The soul that accompanies with virtue is like an ever-flowing source. It is a pure, clear, and wholesome draught, and it is sweet, rich, and generous of its stores, that injures not, neither does it destroy. So there you have it. All right. So now we're caught up. Go to the next image. Okay, it's blurry, but so through all of these, it leads us on to back to Fronto. So Cornelius Fronto, so Fronto is now going to introduce not only the ideas that we discussed, but in also the authors who created them. So you kind of have now a good backdrop. So this is Cornelius Fronto. Thank you. You can put that picture down. That's great. Now, for a long time, anything by Fronto was lost. Then in 1815, a certain Angelo May, both an Italian cardinal and a philologist, discovered a manuscript in the Ambrosian Library in Milan, which, of course, had his special works. Now, what happens is we do have these letters. I'm going to read a few excerpts from it. But in fact, I have all the letters actually in front of me. But here's a few bits and pieces. He says, for example, he says, in all arts, I take it, total inexperience and ignorance are preferable to semi-experience and half knowledge, he writes to Marcus Aurelius. He says this, for he who is conscious that he knows nothing of an art aims at less, and consequently comes less to grief. In fact, diffidence excuses presumption. But when anyone parades a superficial knowledge as mastery of a subject, through false confidence, he makes manifold slips. They say, too, that it is better to have kept wholly clear the teachings of philosophy, to have tasted them superficially, and as the saying goes, with tips of the lips. Tips of the lips. Oh, wow. And there's a quotable, tips of the lips. Remember that, right? So the idea here is that you either really fully understand something or don't pretend to understand something, and then make a presentation with this. We come across a presentation as if you had this long, vast knowledge, when you're going to miss some of the deeper concepts if you do not take the time to fully understand the topic. And so that's a little bit, he said to him. There's, of course, Fronto also weighed carefully how words must be composed exactly to provide a full meaning. This is also, he says this in one of the letters to Marcus Aurelius. He says, I hardly know whether it is advisable to show how great is the difficulty, what scrupulous and anxious care must be taken in weighing words, for fear the knowledge should check the ardor of the young and weaken their hope of success. The transposition or subtraction or alteration of a single letter in many cases changes the force and beauty of a word and testifies to the taste or knowledge of the speaker. I may say I have noticed when you were reading over to me what you had written and I altered a syllable in a word that you paid no attention to it and thought it of no consequence. I should be loath, therefore, for you not to know the immense difference made by one syllable. So his whole thing is know what you write. Weigh each word carefully, right? Carefully with a sense of understanding. So that's one of the main ideas. Another statement here is, although it appears Marcus Aurelius respected Fronto's harshness, Fronto once wrote him as follows. He says, Lo, master, I have received 2 letters from you at once. In one of these, you scolded me and pointed out that I have written a sentence carelessly. In the other, however, you strove to encourage my efforts with praise. Yet I protest to you by my health, by my mother's and yours, that it was the former letter which gave me the greater pleasure, and that as I read it, I cried out again and again, oh, happy that I am. Are you then so happy, someone will say, for having a teacher to show you how to write a maxim more deftly, more clearly, more tersely, more elegantly? No, that is not my reason for calling myself happy. What then is it? It is that I learned from you to speak the truth. That matter of speaking the truth is precisely what is so hard for gods and men. In fact, there is no oracle so truth-telling as not to contain with it itself something ambiguous or crooked or intricate, whereby the unwary may be caught and interpreting the answer in light of their own wishes, realizing its fallaciousness only when the time is past and the business done. But the thing is profitable, and clearly it is the custom to exercise such things merely as pious fraud and delusion. On the other hand, your fault findings or your guiding reins, whichever it may be, show me the way at once without guile and feigned words. And so I ought to be grateful to you for this, that you teach me before all to speak the truth at the same time and to hear the truth. What an interesting thing that we're learning so much about Marcus Aurelius in just this one passage. I mean, here, most of us enjoy being told things in a nice way, and things that we need to have correction, maybe qualified. But apparently Marcus Aurelius, the one who's wanting to sleep on the ground, likes a little harshness because he wants to be criticized in order to become a better person. And he wants to go through this ascesis. He wants to have this regiment because he is a truth seeker, even if it hurts. But for apparently Marcus Aurelius, writing here, he's admiring him, admiring his teacher for this, Fronto, for this. By the way, of course, he also writes to Fronto and says that you say that you have composed something in Greek, which pleases you more than I can say. Things you have written, are you not he who gave me such a castigation for writing in Greek? However, I must now more than ever write in Greek. And of course, this is the beginning here. This is the year 139 of his obsession with learning ancient Greek. He also, Fronto wrote a story about love, what love is, which is interesting, but it's way too long to go into. And of course, obviously, this love is even passionate, and love is between a man and a woman, and a man and a man, and a woman and a woman. It doesn't matter in this case. Once again, ideas of affection in these areas, even eros, was never a difficulty in ancient times. I want to read also, because I think it's interesting, is what Marcus Aurelius wrote to Fronto on his birthday. I mean, I want to tell you that we have so many details, but I wish I would have somebody. This is a great birthday words. Here it is. He says to him, and again, you're learning about Marcus Aurelius. He says, "Hail, my best of masters. I knew that on everyone's birthday, his friends undertake vows for him whose birthday it is. I, however, since I love you as myself, wish to offer up on this day, which is your birthday, hearty prayers for myself. I call therefore with my vows to hear me each one of all the gods who anywhere in the world provide present and prompt help for men, who anywhere give their aid and show their power in dreams or mysteries or healing or oracles. And I place myself according to the nature of each vow in that spot where the God who is invested with that power must be more readily to hear." Here he goes. "Therefore, I now first climb the citadel of the god of Pergamon and beseech Asclepius to bless my master's health and mightily protect it." So he's saying he went to Pergamum and he prayed for Fronto. Then he continues, "Thence I pass on to Athens, and clasping Minerva by her knees, I entreat and pray that if ever I know aught of letters, this knowledge may find its way into my breast from the lips of none other than Fronto." Once again, now he's in Athens. He says he's clinging to Athena, Minerva's knees, and saying he's praying for Fronto now in Athens. "Now I return to Rome and implore with vows the gods that guard the roads and patrol the seas, that every journey of mine you may be with me, and I be not worn out with so constant, so consuming a desire for you." Wow. Now he's on his way to Rome and he's praying at the crossroads. "Lastly, I ask all the tutelary deities of all the nations and the very grove whose rustling fills the Capitoline hill to grant us this, that I might keep with you this day on which you were born for me, with you in good health and spirits. Farewell, my sweetest and dearest of masters. I beseech you, take care of yourself, that when I come, I may see you and my lady greets you as well." Wow. I mean, you can't. What a greeting. It shows that even though Marcus Aurelius, yes, he is a Stoic, he's still a believer in the gods. He still sees them as part of his belief system. And you see the context of that from what we read about the earlier founders, that the gods are aspects or personifications of this natural world of nature itself. Now let's go to the next image because I think this is, I just like this miscellanea. I just kind of want to peruse because I want you to understand a little bit about Marcus. Yeah, this is interesting. So Marcus writes to Fronto, and we're going to learn a little bit here. He says that he's traveling. Marcus is traveling, and he arrives before reaching our country house. We turned aside to Adnagnia, and this is Adnagnia, what it looks like today. He says about a mile off the main road. Then we inspected the ancient township, a tiny place indeed, but containing many antiquities and buildings and religious ceremonies beyond number. There was not a corner without its chapel or shrine or temple. Many books, too, written on linen, and this has a religious significance. Then on the gate, as we came out, we found an inscription twice over to this effect, Flamen Sume Sumatum. I asked one of the townsmen what the last word meant. He said it was Hernician for the pelt of the victim, which the priest draws over his peaked cap on entering the city. That's really interesting. So basically, if you are a priest and you enter into the boundaries of this particular city, there's an inscription that says, well, you got to put a pelt over your cap as you enter. Quite a number of other things we learned, which we are glad to know. But the one thing we are not glad of is that it was in your absence. That is our chief concern. So, yeah, there you have it. So I just think that was kind of an interesting bit and pieces there. Let's go to the next. Let's end this image. Thank you so much. I do want to do a few more here, just a couple more here. Marcus Aurelius de Fronto. Also, here is something else because we want to understand his character. We have a letter of Marcus Aurelius de Fronto from 144 to 145. He says, "Hail, most reverend master." We're going to learn a little bit about his ordinary life. "We are well. By a satisfactory arrangement of meals, I work from 3 o'clock till 8. For the next hour, I paced about in slippers, most contentedly before my bedroom. Then putting on my boots and donning my cloak, for we had been told to come in that dress, I went off to pay my respects to my lord, and of course, that will be Antonius Pius. We set out for the chase and did deeds. We did hear say that boars have been bagged, for we were not lucky enough to see any. However, we climbed quite a steep hill. Then in the afternoon, we came home, I to my books. So taking off my boots and doffing my dress, I passed nearly 2 hours on my couch, reading Cato's speech on the property of Pulcheria and another in which he impeached the tribune. Ho, you cried to your boys, and he quotes everything. So he is, yes, he is active. He's out there. He's hunting boar. But at the same time, he is a person of letters. He loves his books. He is a person of study. And one thing, he says, he says, then he said he went off to attend a sacrifice. And when he got back, by the way, he says he had lunch. He said, what do I think I ate? He says, a wee bit of bread, though I saw others devouring beans, onion, and herring full of roe. But then we worked hard at great gathering, and I had a good sweat, and we were merry, and so forth. So he talks about his day. We have so many details about Marcus Aurelius from Fronto and this exchange. It's pretty rich. It's a very deep insight into his character, so we understand him very well. There's one other thing. Fronto says at one point, he says, I have occasionally inveighed against you behind your back in somewhat strong terms before a very few of my most intimate friends. Time was I did this when you went about in public gatherings with too serious a face, as when you used to read books either in the theater or at the banquet, nor was I then refraining from theaters, nor as yet from banquets. On such occasions, then, I would call you an austere and unreasonable even at times. So what's happened here is Fronto's mentioning that this guy, this bookworm, Marcus Aurelius, who is a philosopher at heart, He was not only serious at these gatherings, he'd take his books with him to the theater or a banquet, and he'd sit and read. He'd sit and read. That he called him austere, unreasonable, even at times stung by anger, a disagreeable sort of person. Well, that's pretty. Fronto has guts, right? But if not anyone else found fault with you in my hearing with similar detraction, I could not listen to them with any patience. So it was easier for me to say this of you myself than to suffer others to speak any ill of you, just as I could more easily strike and so forth. So what's happening here is like, hey, I'm allowed to be critical, but nobody else better say bad things about you or else. And it kind of reminds me about, people sometimes you may have family and friends who will be critical, but if anybody else says anything about you, watch out. You can't say the same thing. But there's a measure of intimacy of conversation between the two that is, it's pretty amazing. Now, I do want to say just a few more, and then we're going to go into the life. Let's see here. Here's a good one from Fronto to Marcus. There's a reference here. It says, he says, I got those letters of yours, and I was in similar plight to a lover who sees his darling running towards him along a rough and dangerous pathway, for he rejoices at the loved one's coming at the same time that he fears the danger. Consequently, I do not care for the story, which is such a favorite with actors, where a loving girl standing by night in a turret with a lighted taper in her hand awaits her young lover as he swims the straits. For though I burn with love for you, he says, I would rather be severed utterly from you than let you swim so deep a sea so late at night, for fear the moon should set, the winds dash you out of your light, and cold benumb your senses there, and a wave, a reef, a sea beast in some way work you harm. So Fronto is saying, you know what? This idea, this romantic idea of being with your lover and going through all these trials and pains, where your life is at jeopardy. He says, I don't like that. I'd rather just you don't do that because I'm more worried about your life than us being together, because your safety is first and foremost. And I think that's another interesting connection between them. Okay. So where do we go from here? The next image is a very strange one. So Fronto is one of the teachers. This other teacher here is Junius Rusticus. And this is the only the statue is gone. This is what's left over of the statue. Now that statue is gone now. It's obviously from Middle Ages. Apparently his head survived and something else survived. That's all. This is Junius Rusticus. This is another teacher of Marcus Aurelius. And of course, he learned also Stoicism from him. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius states, from Rusticus, I received the impression that my character required improvement and discipline. And from him, I learned not to be led astray to sophistic emulation, nor to write on speculative matters, nor to delivering little hortatory orations, nor to showing myself off as a man who practices such discipline or does benevolent acts in order to make a display. And so there you have it. So what will happen here is, as you can see, that once again, it's all about, we'll take the image down temporarily. So once again, it's all about being true. It's about being genuine and letting your words reflect that. Not bombastic words, superfluous words that go on, but measured, clear, concise, direct. And once again, the context of the time is there's so many orators talking off, going back and forth, just tickling of the ears. There was a story where Frontinus, he was a sophist, spent a lot of time in Ephesus. The Emperor Trajan loved him, and but his words were just all over the place, using the Asiatic style, which is known for a sophistry, but it's also known for being just very intricate and all over the place. And of course, of course, he did everything in Greek. But what happened is that his words are so beautiful that everybody was attracted to him, even when they didn't understand Greek. His words were so entertaining. In fact, Trajan, the emperor, loved him and says, the famous quote is, "I know not what you say, but I love to hear you." Well, the thing is that people are interested in having their ears tickled. But with Marcus Aurelius and many of the Stoics, the idea is like strip it down, keep it clear, keep it concise, and make it applicable to everybody. And that was a major idea. Okay. Now, also, of course, now we move on to, but let's move on to Antoninus Pius. So let's go to the next image. Antoninus Pius reigned from 138 to 161. This is the emperor just prior to Marcus Aurelius, one of a series of emperors considered good, both in ancient times and today, following that of Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian. And so this is Marcus Aurelius's new father via adoption. And he was a rather virtuous role model, much like that of his grandfather. Now, Antoninus Pius worked his way up through the political system in Rome, fulfilling the role of quaestor and praetor. So he was even in the consulship by 120 CE. His good stewardship caught the eye of Hadrian, who decided to select him as one of the 4 proconsuls of Italy. Again, Antoninus Pius proved himself a very capable administrator and gained the lucrative position of proconsul of the province of Asia. This is around 134 CE. And so Antoninus Pius' rise in power was due to his merit. He is there not because of who he was in family connection. He was promoted because of his abilities to govern, and then was adopted by Hadrian as his son, even though he obviously was not a son, to be a good emperor. So there you have it. Okay, we can see me for a little bit. So Antonius came to the throne following the death of Hadrian in 138 CE. He took on a rather long title of Imperator Caesar Titus Aelius Hadrianus Antonius Augustus Pontifex Maximus. Of course, obviously, right away, emphasizing the idea of Pontifex Maximus, which is head of the Roman religion. At the very beginning of his rule, the Senate was divided on whether to give Hadrian divine honors or since his relationship with them soured towards the end. But Antoninus Pius made it very clear that Hadrian needed to be deified. As is obvious, if Hadrian was not deified, then Antonius would not be the son of God. His adoption would then lose its purpose, and he would lose much of the legitimacy he needed to have within the imperial cult. As per instructions from Hadrian, Antonius Pius then adopted Marcus Aurelius, the son of his wife's brother, and Lucius Verus, the son of Lucius Aelius. And as I noted, Marcus Aurelius was only 16 years of age at the time, but life was going to transform immediately as Antonius as his father. Cassius Dio writes that because Marcus Aurelius was so prone to virtue, he caught the attention of Hadrian and someone as capable as an emperor, maybe someday. As Dio states that it was chiefly for this reason he had adopted him. So again, his adoption comes by way of merit. Sure, it's his wife's, son of his wife's brother, but at the same time, the idea is choosing emperors who have an ability. Also, it says he said he did not become haughty, but though young and a Caesar, served Antonius most loyally through all the latter's reign, and without giving offense, showed honor to others who were foremost in the state. He used to always salute the most worthy men in the house of Tiberius, where he lived, before visiting his father, not only without putting on the attire befitting his rank, but actually dressed as a private citizen and receiving them in the very apartment, even where he slept, he said. He used to visit many who were sick and never missed going to his teachers. He would wear a dark cloak whenever he went, and he unaccompanied by his father, so he's very humble. And he never employed a torchbearer for himself alone. Upon being appointed leader of the knights, he entered the forum with all the rest, although he was a Caesar, so he didn't demand any special privileges. This shows how excellent, he says, he was in his natural disposition, though it was greatly aided by his education, says Dio. He was always steeping himself in Greek and Latin rhetorical and philosophical learning, even after he had reached man's state and had hopes of becoming emperor. So for him, just because he was appointed into this area doesn't mean he's given up philosophy. No. He's bringing it with him. Marcus Aurelius greatly esteemed his adopted father and Emperor Antonius Pius, learning much from him as well. In fact, Marcus Aurelius follows in his meditations about what he bestowed to his character. So he tells us in his meditations what Antonius Pius does for him. From my father, gentleness and unshaken resolution in judgment takes after full examination, no vainglory about external honors, love of work and perseverance, readiness to hear those who had anything to contribute to the public advantage, the desire to reward every man according to his desert without partiality, the experience that knew where to tighten the reins and where to relax. So he knew when to say, all right, we need to be a little bit more strict here, and when to be, we can be more relaxed. So he's between, so he, in a sense, he is everything about balance, control, temperance. Now, next image. Antonius Pius faced tragedy almost immediately after gaining the imperial throne. What happened, of course, is his dear Faustina the Elder died in 140 CE. Antonius was besides himself in grief and immediately had her deified, declaring her as a goddess. Now let's go to the next image. The apotheosis of Faustina the Elder will be depicted in a honorary column of Antonius Pius, which is set up in 161 at the Campus Martius. Here, a winged genius carries Antonius and his wife Faustina to heaven, with the two lovers reunited once again. And of course, Faustina is honored. Also, there was coins that were distributed to the divine Faustina. And he also created a new charity called the Girls of Faustina, which is meant especially to assist orphan Roman girls. Also, in honor of his wife, Antonius Pius revised what's called the Alimenta of Trajan, that took care of the poor children and orphans in Italy and made it even more efficient. So this is pretty fascinating, right? So we got this handing out, helping others. So there you have it. So let's go to the next image here. So there's also a temple that was established, dedicated to the divine Faustina, his wife. And after his death, it would be also connected to him and his deification, but it was initially built for his wife. That's the way it looked like in ancient times in the Roman Forum. And the next image shows what it looks like today. There you have it. During this period of time, let's go to the next image. The Roman Empire was pretty big, right? Except for a few disturbances along the border. For example, in Mauritania and Dacia, for the most part, actual peace reigned supreme in the Roman Empire during his 22-year rule. And so a literal Pax Romana commenced, the kind of peace the world had never known in that particular region. And well, would probably, would never happen again, right? So yeah, that's kind of depressing, right? So it is also certain, know that that this is one of the best times of the Roman Empire. Now, next image. Antoninus did order one military advance into Scotland, advancing the empire from what's called the Firth of Firth to the Firth of Clyde, and here he ordered the building of another wall in Britannia beyond that of the famous Hadrian's Wall, known as the Antonine Wall. Let's go to the next image. It was started in 142. The wall took about 12 years to complete and finished in 154. The wall itself was 63 kilometers long, basically 39 miles, 3 meters high, which is 10 feet, 5 meters wide, which is 16 feet. There's a deep ditch on the northern side. Most scholars agree that there was actually a wooden palisade on top of the turf. So it was actually taller, but the wooden parts and the dirt are now all gone. This is to keep back, of course, the Caledonians. The Caledonians, of course, next image. But what happened is, unfortunately, although this wall was protected by 16 forts, only 8 years after it was completed, this wall was, for some reason, abandoned soon after. And so the barbarians went back to Hadrian's Wall. This is Hadrian's Wall. However, the Caledonians breached Hadrian's Wall in 180. They invaded, and eventually, this is, of course, the end of Marcus Aurelius' reign. They invaded, and eventually a peace treaty with payments were given under Commodus. But then there was another attack in 197. And so what will happen is under Septimius Severus in the year 208, this wall was, the Antonine Wall was rebuilt and used yet again. And so there you have that. So it was used on 2 different occasions. Thank you so much for that. I think that's great. Aelius Aristides, living during the reign of Antonius Pius, wrote that during his era, it seemed like the world was on holiday, where the blessings of freedom was enjoyed by all who wished to participate, and strife between rivals was extinguished. As for the cities, they gloried in the radiance of splendid buildings intended for the benefit of all. That included grand colonnades to shade the populace from the sun, splendid gymnasia to exercise and to swim for sport or for pleasure, schools to educate the intellect, grand public fountains to refresh one's thirst with clean water, and mighty temples to worship the gods. So this was a great place. Trade was swift because Rome possessed the great sea of the Mediterranean, and this empire's roads unified the furthest corners of the earth. And so, in fact, the empire was very much understood to be a garden of pleasure where everyone shared the earth as their common mother. He talked about the splendor of such cities as Corinth, Alexandria, and the cities of Ionia. So this is, the reason why I'm bringing this up is the era of Antonius Pius is such a great era. It's going to contrast with the era of Marcus Aurelius that's coming up. So it's good to be it's easier to be a virtuous emperor during a time of peace, but how does one continue to be virtuous in a time of discord? During the reign of Antonius Pius, he spent much time and effort improving the internal network system of the empire, repairing all the roads and building new ones. This is the time when mystery cults thrived and continued in their popularity. At this time, the cult of Isis was spreading, even all the way to Rome. These statues of Isis have been found everywhere in the Western Roman Empire. The imperial cult thrived during the reign of Antonius Pius, who was very prudent in establishing many temples dedicated to his adopted deified father, Adrian. The emperor always strove to revive the former religion that was popular during the time of the Roman Republic. which often involved Greek as well as Roman mythology. Let's go to the next image. And then attempted to graft this traditional devotion to the imperial cult itself. Antonius Pius, in fact, re-emphasized the importance of Jupiter, king of the gods. This devotion was minted on coinage. For example, a coin issued in 157 showing Jupiter triumphant over the giants. Antonius Pius restored the ancient shrines and temples dedicated to Jupiter all about Rome, with one inscription stating that he restored a temple dedicated to Jupiter with Juno and Minerva in 139. Another inscription establishing the creation of a shrine dedicated to Jupiter in 148. So we have in Sparta, the population dedicated 50 altars to Antonius Pius in the form of Jupiter. 50 altars in the form of Jupiter. Sorry, altars in Antonius Pius in the form of Jupiter. But for the Greeks, they knew him as Zeus Eleutheros. So there you have that. Also, what was revived is the worship of Hercules too. So there you have it. Thank you for showing that. As the imperial cult in connection to Christianity, we have very little direct documentation, but what we do have reveals that Antonius Pius maintained the precedent created by Trajan. Wherefore, those who are found guilty through proper channels and not by anonymous petitions, and who could not first invoke the gods of Rome, second, could not offer prayers with incense before the image of the emperor, and third, could not curse Christ, were to be put to death. So that still continues. And Polycarp writes some letters. Actually, Polycarp was executed during this period of time. While Christians became more tolerated, however, under Antonius Pius, this was not the case of Jews. Now, under Hadrian, the Jews were forbidden to enter into the Jerusalem. The city converted into a city that for Gentiles, known as Aelia Capitolina. And so what happened is that, and so Jews were no longer allowed in Jerusalem. But then it happened. Let's go to the next image. Then a fateful day happened. July 11th, 138, arrived when Antonius Pius died. And so Marcus Aurelius became emperor, along with Lucius Verus. Antonius Pius died at his ancestral estate at Laurenum in Etruria, about 12 miles from Rome, after eating Alpine cheese the night before, gained a fever in the night, and then dying on March 7, 161, at the age of 70, calling the imperial council. The empire then was bestowed to his daughter, and through her to Marcus Aurelius. His last utterance was the password given to the night watch of the tribune, which was equanimity, and then he died in his sleep. Antonius Pius enjoyed the longest reign of any Roman emperor, with the exception of Augustus Caesar. So there we have, of course, this monument dedicated to Antonius Pius, and you can see there he is, esteemed with his beloved Faustinia, going off into, of course, into the afterlife. Now, let's go to let's take a look at a close up of the image here. There's a nice picture there. There we go. You see the two together. He truly loved Faustina. But now he joined her in death. Okay, let's go to the next image. Now, the surviving part of the epitome of Cassius Dio's introduction emphasizes Marcus Aurelius' continued devotion to philosophy right from the start, thinking himself as an emperor of letters. However, the co-emperor seen here is Lucius Verus. So while Marcus Aurelius was known as the man of letters, Lucius Verus was understood to be basically a man with powers, especially his military capacity. One of the reasons for this division was that Marcus Aurelius was not inclined to prolong physical activity. Dio says, for he was frail in body himself and devoted the greater part of his time to letters. Dio believes that his weaker disposition was, quote, a result of his close application and study, unquote, and added that, quote, in the beginning, he had been so vigorous that he used to fight in armor and on the chase would strike down wild boars while on horseback, unquote. But those days were long gone, and his strength was more in mind than in body. The one physical activity he continued from his youth was, of course, writing. For from his early youth and even later, he wrote most of his letters to his intimate friends with his own hand. In contrast, Lucius was a vigorous man of younger years and better suited for military enterprises. Therefore, Marcus made him his son-in-law by marrying him to his daughter Lucilla and sent him to conduct the war against the Parthians. With this said, Marcus was understood as the more senior of the two emperors, having more auctoritas than Lucius Verus, for he alone was declared as Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman public religion, and he also held a consulship one more time under Verus. So he is definitely the superior to him. So let's go to the next image. Now, the war against the Persians dominated the early part of the reign of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Cassius Dio recording, Volgasius, it seems, had begun the war by hemming in on all sides the Roman legion under Severianus that was stationed in Elgaria, a place in Armenia, and then shooting down and destroying the whole force, leaders and all. And he was now advancing, powerful and formidable, against the cities of Syria. Lucius, as a Lucius Verus, accordingly went to Antioch and collected a large body of troops. Then, keeping the best of the leaders under his personal command, he took up his own headquarters in the city where he made all the dispositions and assembled the supplies for the war. While he entrusted the armies to Cassius, then the latter made a noble stand against the attack of Volgasius. And finally, when the king was deserted by his allies and began to retire, he pursued him as far as Seleucia and Ctesiphon, destroying Seleucia by fire and razing to the ground the palace of Volgasius at Ctesiphon. In returning, he lost a great many of his soldiers through famine and disease, yet he got back to Syria with the survivors. Lucius gloried in these exploits and took great pride in them, yet his extreme good fortune did him no good, for he is said to have engaged in a plot later against his father-in-law, Marcus, and to have perished by poison before he could carry out any of his plans, at least, according to Cassius Dio. Let's end the image here. Thank you. Of course, there is debate whether Lucius Verus planned to overthrow Marcus Aurelius or not by 169. There was certainly some tension between the two. For example, in contrast to Marcus Aurelius's rather, how do I say it, austere personal habits and emphasis on moderation, Lucius Verus rather enjoyed the, how do I say this, the excessive life of constant indulgence, to the point where he even built a complete tavern in his own home so he could drink until dawn with his partying friends. In fact, that oftentimes included a troupe of actors. In fact, Verus, beyond making his own pub in his own home so he could drink all night, he also used to go incognito into the streets of Rome, joining various parties throughout the city. Verus also had a passion for chariot racing and so was constantly at the hippodrome. But while Verus managed a really, how do I say it, hefty appetite for play, he somehow functioned during the day and proved himself an efficient emperor. As a result, Marcus Aurelius did not intervene. As long as he's able to function during the day, then what happens to going on at night, he'll leave it best alone. Although food poisoning was the official cause of death, most scholars believe that he may have actually died of smallpox, from the Antonine plague that was brought back with the Roman troops following the war with Persia in the year 169 CE. Now, let's talk about this horrendous plague. Next image. This plague, you can see here, was spread throughout the Roman Empire. It had a very real impact upon religious beliefs and values of the era, deeply impacting the major urban centers. So, of course, it hit Rome, of course, obviously, and pretty bad. I mean, it's killing literally thousands. Okay, let's go into a few examples. Let's see me for a second. I know it's a little blurry there. So a good example, I got to give you an example of the plague. It happens to be in the city of Ephesus. In fact, in connection to the cult of Artemis of the Ephesia. During the reign of Antonius Pius, the cult of Artemis Ephesia reached the apex of its popularity, with the curities increased from 6 to 9 in number. More sacrifices as well as entertainments now part of the regular celebrations, and even an extra hierophant added to help officiate the increased number of those wishing to be initiated into the mysteries of the goddess. The cult of Artemis Ephesia was financially secure, always having enough wealthy investors ready to pay whatever expenses were necessary to make the worship and ritual celebration even more spectacular than ever before. But at the beginning of the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the proconsul Popilius Carus Pedon granted the petition made by the Bulla and the Demos of Ephesus to make an entire month of the Artemisium a holiday free from public business and a celebration of the goddess. So things are still going very well. So during this period of time, as noted by Richard Oster, during this period of time, the Ephesian Bull discovered the Roman proconsul of Asia was transacting business during the sacred festival of Artemisia, an act both impious and illegal, and was immediately admonished for his violation of those holy days of Artemis. Of course, this strict edict for some was also a savvy strategy to lure more tourists to Ephesus. These festivities generating more revenue over a consecutive period of days, because it's a month, is a financial blessing needed as the metropolis was then starting to experience a brief economic slump during the reign. But then what happens is as follows. You're going to have in 166, 167, 2 Roman legions fighting in the Parthian campaigns under the command of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, returned back to Ephesus and brought the plague with them. And this devastated the entire population. I'm giving you a local example of Ephesus, what's going on throughout the entire Roman Empire. And of course, it spreads all the way to Rome. According to inscription dating to 167 CE, discovered in the Prytaneum, or the city hall, the Ephesians sent a message to the oracle of Apollo at Claros for aid during this dire emergency. Let's go to the this image. I've been to Claros myself. So here's Claros. There's me holding up a pillar. I'm the pillar of the community, as you can see. Let's go to the next image. There you go. You can see it's got a little waterlogged here. Let's go to the next image, and you see it's the oracle area, and which has, of course, water involved. And what happened is that the Ephesians sent a message to the oracle of Apollo at Claros. Apollo instructed them that they were to take a golden image of his sister, Artemis Ephesia, to the Hermos Valley and worship her, praise her, and sing songs dedicated to her glory. The hope was that the combined strength of Artemis and Apollo together might possibly save them, since, as it must appeared, Artemis on her own did not appear to be successful in stopping the continual loss of life that also devastated much of the rest of the Roman Empire on a scale as bad, if not worse, than the bubonic plague in the 14th century. In fact, this epidemic was actually an outbreak of two diseases, both smallpox and the measles, and continued to break out at various times unchecked until around 180 CE. The plague most likely took the life, as I mentioned, of Lucius Verus in 169 and became so severe that Dio Cassius claimed it took as many as 2,000 lives a day in the city of Rome itself at one point. Now, one possible ramification of the plague was that many Ephesians came to believe Artemis alone was not enough to help them during such trials. Let's go to the next image. We can see another image of the site there, the oracle. Let's go to the next image. We'll see what my little picture of Ephesus there. Okay. And so what happens, we have already examined their sudden appeal to Apollo for help, but an inscription dedicated by the Praetorius Tullia in 170, just 4 years after the outbreak of the epidemic, suggests that the Praetorium, the city hall itself, was becoming a sacred space for other gods in addition to Artemis. This inscription was actually a prayer in dactylic meter, invoking the gods who are older than all, demonstrating an appeal to gods who were older and possibly more powerful than their current god Artemis. In fact, Zeus and Hestia are the two most obvious candidates for this distinction. Now, and so what happened, but Artemis appeared unable to save the Ephesians from the plague. This greatly tarnished her reputation. And so in response, civic authorities and patrons alike felt obliged to rehabilitate her fame as savior, and thereby reestablishing their city's prestige in the process. So she becomes, one strategy included expanding the altar of Artemis in the Triodos area into a monument dedicated to the Parthian War. So you see here, this is the library of Celsus. And you see here on the left-hand side will be the altar of Ephesus, or so excuse me, altar of Artemis that will become the Parthian monument. And on the right-hand side, you have the Triodos gate dedicated to Hecate. Let's go to the next image. Here is the altar, right here. And so what happened is that they take this altar of Artemis and they redo it, right? Demonstrating to all passing along this very busy intersection of the city that Artemis, as well as Selene, was responsible for this crucial military victory despite the plague. So what they do is that they change this altar of Artemis into one that includes the victory of the Parthians to show that she has strength and that she indeed is a savior. Let's go to the next image. There's a close-up of the altar. So you can see those are the steps still remain. There's a Via Sacra Road is behind it. Let's go to the next image. There's me. There I am. Just to prove, there I am. Next image. And here's the Mausius Mithridates gate that is dedicated to Hecate. And so in many ways, when we described the special magic that was done connected to Artemis with Apollo, a lot of it is infernal magic. And many scholars have agreed that it is Artemis Hecate that is being appealed to specifically as a salvic figure. And I think it's interesting that you have an altar of Artemis that's altered to that dedicated to the victory of the Parthian War on one side. And on the other side, you have this Mausius Mithridates gate that is dedicated to Artemis Hecate of the three-way crossing. Let's go to the next image. Yeah, there I am between the two. That one actually got in. Next image. Oh, there's a close-up of the altar. Sorry. Next image. There we go. And so this is the Mausius Mithridates gate. And so if there's any questions about its dedication, let's go to the next image. And you see there's right there in the gate, there is the three-way goddess Hecate with the torches in hand. So let's go to the next image. The next image shows what this altar looked like. A little bit larger, and you can see the reliefs there. So this is the altar. And next image. And you can see this is the altar of Lucius Verus and the Parthian War dedication. And so what will happen is that she is now connected to that, and she will become more of a savior figure. But I thought that was an interesting bit of evidence. Okay, let's go. Let's see me for a few moments. But there you have it. So it is a devastating plague. Now, of course, but there was another threat. So you have the Parthian War, which is won, but you have now this devastating plague going across the Roman Empire, killing thousands upon thousands and making people even doubt their beliefs so that they will be transformed. In the case of Artemis of the Ephesians, she'll be transformed to include many other aspects of various goddesses, including Hecate, and she's become known as a savior figure. But there's another area, and that was under threat, and that is the upper frontier. As the Germans, pressed behind by the Huns, began to move over the border. Now, while Lucius Verus took care of the area of the Parthians, Marcus Aurelius focused upon attempting to secure the areas about the Danube, the eastern part. So there you have it. So Cassius Dio notes the emperor himself fought for a long time, almost his entire life, one might say, with the barbarians in the region of Ister, with both the Izakis and the Marcomanni, and after the other, using Pannonia as his base, so he's constantly there. Meanwhile, the border along the Western Europe, especially about the Rhine, was entrusted to other generals, including Pertinax, who will become the next Roman emperor. Actually, not after Commodus, so there will be one more away. It was during this war, so let's take a look here, the map. So there you have it. So he's moving into this area of Pannonia, constant battle. It was during the war against the Quadi that the famous Thundering Legion story took place. So let's go to the next image, which has an image of it. This is on the column of Marcus Aurelius. The version by Cassius Dio goes as follows. So Marcus subdued the Marcomanni and the Izakis after many hard struggles and dangers. A great war against the people called the Quadi also fell to his lot, and it was his good fortune to win an unexpected victory. Or rather, heaven vouchsafed it for him. For when the Romans were in peril in the course of the battle, the divine power saved them in a most unexpected manner. The Quadi had surrounded them at a spot favorable for their purpose, and the Romans were fighting valiantly with their shields locked together. Then the barbarians ceased fighting, expecting to capture them easily as the result of the heat and their thirst. So they posted guards all about and hemmed them in to prevent their getting water anywhere, for the barbarians were far superior in numbers. The Romans, accordingly, were in a terrible plight from fatigue, wounds, the heat of the sun, and thirst, and so could neither fight nor retreat, but were standing in the line, and at their several posts, they were scorched by the heat, when suddenly many clouds gathered and a mighty rain, not without divine interposition, burst upon them. Indeed, there is a story to the effect that Arnufis, an Egyptian magician who was a companion of Marcus, had invoked by means of enchantments various deities, and in particular Mercury, the god of the air, and by this means attracted the rain. Of course, this is the version that we hear. So you have the rain coming about. That's Cassius Dio. Zephanius also has his version of the story as well. I'm not going to go through his whole story, but I will just bring it up, bits and pieces of it, because there's a story about what's called the Thundering Legion. Now, what happens is following. you have the Thundering Legion. He says, this is what Dio says about the matter, but he's apparently in error, whether intentionally or otherwise, and yet I am inclined to believe his error was chiefly intentional. It surely must be so, for he was not ignorant of the division of soldiers that bore the special name of Thundering Legion. Let's go to the next image. Indeed, he mentions that's kind of scary. He mentions in the list, along with the others, a title which was given to them for no other reason than because of the incident that occurred on this very war. It was precisely this incident that saved the Romans on this occasion and brought destruction upon the barbarians. And not Arnulfus, the magician, for Marcus is not reported to have taken pleasure in the company of magicians or in such crafts. Now, the incident I have referred to is this. Marcus had a division of soldiers, the Romans call a division of legion, from Miletus, and these people are all worshipers of Christ. Now, it is stated that in the battle, when Marcus found himself at a loss of what to do in the circumstances and feared for his whole army, the prefect approached him and told him that those who are called Christians can accomplish anything, whatever, by their prayers, and that in the army there chanced to be a whole division of the sect. Marcus, on hearing this, appealed to them to pray to their God. And when they had prayed, their God immediately gave ear and smote the enemy with thunderbolts and comforted the Romans with a shower of rain. Marcus was greatly astonished at this and not only honored the Christians by an official decree, but also named the legion the Thundering Legion. And so you have this story. So you got this conflict of different stories. Of course, obviously, it starts to rain. It drenches everything, and the Romans soldiers are able to have their thirst quenched. Let's go to the next image. All these images, however, of the Thundering Legion are actually found on the column of Marcus Aurelius, which still stands today in Rome. This is an imperial monument that was dedicated to the wars of Marcus Aurelius with the barbarians from 161 to 180. It is a visual narrative. Let's go to the next image of campaigns along the Danube. It's pretty sophisticated. By the way, during the Middle Ages, they charged fees to go to the very top, and it was very lucrative in the business sense. Next image. The relief, high relief, beautiful. It's a spiral relief and shows, of course, the narrative of the campaign. You can follow as you zigzag around the Marcomanni, the Quades, Sarmatians. It was started in 180, but the inscriptions show that it was completed around 193. Let's go to the next image. There you can see the high relief even better. Wow, that's pretty impressive. It is 97 feet high. And again, it still stands today. Thank you for showing that. Okay, so what is Marcus Aurelius' actual viewpoint of Christians? Marcus Aurelius does share what he personally thinks of Christians. He does. For as a Stoic philosopher, he was critical of the way that they conducted themselves, especially when under persecution. At one point in his meditations, Marcus Aurelius stated that while it is certainly admirable for the soul to be ready to face death, he adds that, quote, this readiness must come from its own decision, not from mere opposition like the Christians, but rationally, religiously, and so as to persuade others without dramatics, unquote. What does that mean? So to Marcus, many Christians were trying to get themselves a martyr's death out of a sense of dramatics, eager to face, he believes, a senseless death rather than being sincere in their convictions. There's also this idea of peer pressure, that they're following what others are doing rather than have an individual decision on that. You know, he's all for, if you want to do this on your own, you want to sacrifice your life, okay, that's great. But don't do so just because everybody's doing so or in such a dramatic way. If you want to go, do it quietly. Why do this? As Robert Grant notes, many Christians were playing the tragedy hero, and in doing so were considered by Marcus Aurelius as immature and insincere. Marcus, okay, so it's pretty pointed. Marcus Aurelius' tutor, Fronto, who we got to know pretty well, who is his teacher in Stoicism, was more pronounced in his thoughts concerning Christians, with many of his words preserved in Minucius Felix's work known as the Octavius, which is written between 210 to 230 CE, and spoken via the words of the character by the name of Helicelius, who believes Christians feast once a week, during which time, quote, the flame of impure lust and drunkenness has been lit. And so what's happening now is you have this connection that, which is oftentimes is that Christians, they celebrate a love feast. And because they celebrate a love feast, this is understood in private and special areas, and they call themselves brothers and sisters, and they're not necessarily related. The rumor went around that Christians were into orgastic kinds of celebrations. So licentious, they were very in depravity. So these are sex feasts going on, according to this is the perception of Romans. And this continues. And so they entice a dog tied to a lampstand to jump and dance by a little cake tossed beyond the area of its tether. This is a weird reference to the Eucharist, which is the sign to extinguish the lamp and for the weekly orgy to follow. Fronto, also via Caecilius, next says that they, quote, embrace one another in their unspeakable lusts as chance brings them together, and all alike are incestuous, unquote. He adds that Christians in general, quote, lack education and culture and are crude and ignorant, unquote. So you see, this is a perspective, and I'm sure that Marcus Aurelius heard these impressions by his teacher, whom he loved dearly. He also says that Christians were deemed by Fronto to propagate, quote, sick delusions and a senseless and crazy superstition and an old womanly superstition. As for the crucifixion, Fronto states, quote, to say that their ceremonies center on a man put to death for his crime and on the fatal wood of the cross is to assign to these abandoned wretches sanctuaries which are appropriate to them and the kind of worship they deserve, unquote. So, all right. So there it is. Pretty dark view. I'm not saying that the views of Fronto are the same as Marcus Aurelius, but you know that they did talk to each other. They knew each other really well, and they wrote tons of letters and correspondence. So Marcus Aurelius would have known this, but he would also have known this from all the others. This is the common belief of so many Romans because they did not take the time to understand what the belief system is all about. Maybe Marcus Aurelius did. So therefore, his main point was just against the displays of martyrdom without going through the ritual specifically. Because of his Stoic training, Marcus Aurelius believed that the very idea of the immortality of the soul specifically tied to a particular form of morality, that being, if one believes exclusively their doctrines, they will have rewards inclusive of heaven. And if one disbelieves, they will suffer hellfire as fundamentally, you saw this idea as fundamentally immoral and even dangerous. He thought this is wrong. You can't impose such beliefs. In reaction to this belief, he passed a law promising exile to anyone who attempted, quote, to influence people's mind by fear of the divinity, unquote, so that such exclusive Christian teachings will be discouraged from spreading. So his problem with Christianity in this regard, once again, not the rituals, is the idea of you believe what we believe, you go to heaven. If you don't believe what we believe, you go to hell. And then therefore using that fear of the divinity to bring people into Christianity. He said, this is no, you can't do this. He believed that this is wrong from his perspective. You can't force people to believe something through fear. So use something other than fear. But at this time, they're hearing all these strange rumors. You're having all these martyrs. You got to understand the spirit of the times, right? Moving right along, the reign of Marcus Aurelius is marked by a revolt in Egypt, caused by the herdsmen known as the Bucoli. Cassius Dio notes that the people, called the Bucoli, began a disturbance in Egypt, and under the leadership of one Isidorus, a priest, caused the rest of the Egyptians to revolt. At first arrayed in women's garments, they had deceived the Roman centurion, causing him to believe that they were women of the Bucoli and were going to give him gold as ransom for their husbands, and had then struck down when he approached them. They also sacrificed his companion, and after swearing an oath over his entrails, they devoured them. Well, we're talking cannibalism here. Isidorus surpassed all his contemporaries in bravery. Next, having conquered the Romans in Egypt in a pitched battle, they came near capturing Alexandria too, and would have succeeded had not Cassius, this is a general, Cassius, been sent against them from Syria. He contrived to destroy their mutual accord and to separate them from one another. For because of their desperation as well as their number, he had not ventured to attack them while they were united. And thus, when they fell to quarreling, he subdued them. So there you have it. So you have this revolt in Egypt. These are not the best of times. These are now getting into the worst of times, but it's going to get worse. Let's go to the next image. His reign was also marked by a civil war, which began as a result of a miscalculation on the part of Faustina the Younger, who was the wife of Marcus Aurelius. Dio states, this is connected to, of course, the general Cassius, who you see right here. When his general Cassius rebelled in Syria, Marcus, in great alarm, summoned his son Commodus from Rome, as being now entitled to assume the toga virilis. Cassius, who was a Syrian from Sarus, had shown himself an excellent man, and the sort one would desire to have as an emperor, save for the fact that he was the son of one Heliodorus, who had been content to secure the governorship of Egypt at the reward of his oratorical ability. But Cassius, in rebellion, made a terrible mistake due to his having been deceived by Faustina. This is the wife of Marcus Aurelius. What happened? You see what happens. The latter, the wife, who was the daughter of Antonius Pius, seeing that her husband had fallen ill and expecting that he would die at any moment, was afraid the throne might fall to some outsider, inasmuch as Commodus was both too young and also rather simple-minded, and that she might thus find herself reduced to a private station. Therefore, she secretly induced Cassius to make his preparations so that anything should happen to Marcus Antonius, he might obtain both her and the imperial power. Now, while he was considering this project, a message came to him that Marcus Aurelius was dead. In fact, Dio writes, in such circumstances, report always represent matters as worse than they really are. And immediately, without waiting to confirm the rumor, this is why you wait, folks, he laid claim to the throne on the ground that he had already been elected by the soldiers who were then in Pannonia. And in spite of the fact that he learned the whole truth before long, nevertheless, having once made a beginning, he did not change his course, but speedily won over the whole region south of the Taurus and was making preparations to gain the throne through war. So let's see, Macy. This is it's a mess. It's a mess. So what happens? With all this said, while Marcus was making preparations for the civil war, the death of Cassius was reported to him at the same time with the news of many victories over various barbarians. Cassius, it appears, while proceeding on foot, had encountered a centurion by the name of Antoninus, who suddenly wounded him on the neck, and though the blow was not exactly a mortal one, what happened is that others completed the job. Now, what are you going to do? You have a civil war. How is Marcus Aurelius going to face this? So This poor emperor, he faced the Parthian War, and then of course this huge plague is crossing over the Roman Empire, and it lasts throughout his whole reign. And then at the same time, you have constant battles on the barbarian front. Then you have this revolt in Egypt, and on top of that all, you got a civil war with a lot of people involved. I mean, how do you keep your head cool? Once again, Marcus Aurelius is a quintessential Stoic. He is a philosopher as well as an emperor. And what he does, see how he handles this. Well, this is really a test of his character. Marcus Antonius was so greatly grieved at the death of Cassius that he could not bring himself even to look at the severed head of his enemy. But before the murderers drew near, gave orders that he should be buried. This same emperor neither slew nor imprisoned nor put under guard at all any of the senators who had been associated with Cassius. Indeed, he did not so much as bring them before his own court. What? Yeah, and only a few were tried, but everybody else, soldiers and all, they the leaders, were, let's just forget this. Now, this is not typical of a Roman emperor. Roman emperor is like, okay, we're going to kill them, a large portion of them. No, Marcus Aurelius says, no, we're not going to do this. What about his wife? Soon after this incident, his wife, Faustinia the Younger, died. About this time, we read, Faustinius also died, again, reading primary sources, either of the gout from which she suffered or in some other manner in order to avoid being convicted of her compact with Cassius. And yet, Marcus destroyed all the papers that were found in the chest of Pudens without reading any of them, in order that he might not learn even the nature of any of the conspirators who had written anything against him, and so be reluctantly forced to hate them. He said, I'm not going to even read it. I'm going to destroy all the evidence because I don't want to know. I don't need to know. Again, this is unusual. In fact, in his great grief over the death of Faustinia, let's take a look at her, asking that no one of those who had cooperated with Cassius should be put to death. And then, of course, next image, Marcus Aurelius set upon honoring his deceased wife. And it was decreed by the Senate that silver image of Marcus and Faustinia should be set up in the temple of Venus in Rome, and that an altar should be erected whereon all the maidens married to the city and their bridegrooms should offer sacrifice. Also that a golden statue of Faustinia should be carried in a chair into the theater on every occasion when the emperor was to be a spectator, and placed in the special section from which she herself had been wont, when alive, to view the games, and that the most influential women should sit around it. Yes, he decided to completely forgive her in every way. Take the image down. Thank you so much. In general, Marcus Aurelius hated bloodshed of any kind. In fact, Dio stated this: Marcus indeed was so averse to bloodshed that he even used to watch the gladiators in Rome contend like athletes without risking their lives. For he never gave any of them a sharp weapon, but they all fought with blunted weapons like foils furnished with buttons. And so far was he from having against any bloodshed that although he did, at the request of the populace, order a certain lion to be brought in that had been trained to eat men, yet he would not look at the beast nor emancipate his trainer in spite of the persistent demands of the spectators. Instead, he commanded proclamation to be made that the man had done nothing to deserve his freedom. But otherwise, he couldn't stand. How he believed in justice. Marcus Aurelius was known for his relentless desire to see that justice was served, and believed that such procedures cannot be rushed. Of an honest verdict was always the goal. Now, remember, one of the keynote aspects, the pillars of Stoicism is justice. And he does this in a great way. The best way is to read the primary sources demonstrating his sense of justice. Dio stating, the emperor, as often as he had leisure from war, would hold court. He used to allow abundant time to the speakers and entered into the preliminary inquiries and examinations at great length, so as to ensure strict justice by every possible means. In consequence, he would often be trying the same case for as much as 11 or 12 days, even though he sometimes held court at night, for he was industrious and applied himself diligently to all the duties of his office. And he neither said, wrote, nor did anything as if it were a minor matter. But sometimes he would consume whole days over the minutest point, not thinking it right that the emperor should do anything hurriedly. For he believed that if he should slight even the smallest detail, this would bring reproach upon all the other actions. Yet he was so frail in body that at first he could not endure the cold. But even after the soldiers had assembled at his command, he would retire before addressing the word to them. And he goes on, and he took but very little food. And then always at night, it was never his practice to eat during the daytime and so forth. But you get the idea of the sense of justice. Marcus Aurelius also set upon relieving those in debt in Rome, and did so on the occasion of returning to the city. He had been absent for 8 years due to fighting various campaigns against Rome. But look how he handled this situation. Then upon his return to Rome, he made an address to the people, and while he was saying, amongst other things, that he had been absent many years, they all cried out, 8, as in 8 years, and indicated this also with their hands, in order that they may receive that number of gold pieces for a banquet. He smiled and said, 8. And the latter he distributed to them 800 sesterces apiece, a larger amount than they had ever received before. Not only did he do this, but, according to the primary source, he remitted all debts owed by anyone to the emperor's private treasury or to the public treasury for a period of 45 years, not including the 15 years of Hadrian. And he ordered all the documents related to these debts to be burned in the forum. Wow, he got rid of all the debts to the imperium. This is an incredible emperor. When disaster hit various places about the empire, Marcus Aurelius was the kind of man you wanted as an emperor. Quote, he also gave gifts of money to many cities, including Smyrna, which had suffered terrible destruction by an earthquake, and he assigned the task of rebuilding that city to a senator of Praetorian rank. In his religious beliefs, the emperor was very devout, with Dio stating that Marcus was so God-fearing that even on the Deus Nefasti he sacrificed at home, these days being set aside for either feasts or unlucky days in which tradition dictated that no public business could be transacted. Like Hadrian before him, as we know, Marcus Aurelius was also initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. When Marcus had come to Athens and had been initiated into the mysteries, he not only bestowed honors upon the Athenians, but also for the benefit of the whole world, he established teachers at Athens in every branch of knowledge, granting these teachers an annual salary. I like that one. So, wow. So education, right? The University of Athens is rising, especially under Antonius Pius. As for the imperial cult, while he used his position as Pontifex Maximus to secure his position as senior emperor and to venerate his wife upon passing, Marcus Aurelius did not focus on it like Hadrian or Antonius Pius, much of this due to his philosophical disposition. For example, he never refers to these emperors considered virtuous as also divine. And at one place in his meditation states that, quote, in a little while you will be no one and nowhere, even as Hadrian and Augustus are no more. For Marcus Aurelius, all humans are mortal and will perish, leaving very little room for an apotheosis. Hence, much of the imperial cult during his reign was about patriotism and the divine elements, merely lip service orchestrated for those who needed a supernatural element to secure their devotion. But of course, the most important thing, let's look at the next image. We got let's see, skip this one. That's a revolt. Thank you, though. Next one. Next, yeah, there's This is the famous image of Marcus Aurelius, the Capitoline Hill, on his horse. It was not melted down because during the Middle Ages, they mistook this as an image of Peter, the Apostle Peter, and that saved it. So it still stands there. So of lasting value for world civilization were the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, highlighting how philosophy was a key component if one wanted to become a truly educated individual. Rather than in Latin, Marcus Aurelius chose to write all 12 books of this work in Greek, which was considered the best language suitable for philosophy. Marcus Aurelius espoused how important it was to understand the nature of the universe, and from here to decipher their unique place under its overarching canopy, to learn one's duty and obligations to this well-structured cosmos. In fact, Marcus disdained the idea of philosophy as merely a hobby. No. It was a way of life, and at one point declares that one should, quote, put an end once and for all to the discussion of what a good man ought to be and be one. I like that. So, there's too much discussions on what a good man supposed to be and not simply just being one. Marcus Aurelius also believed that one's devotion to duty and morality as gained through philosophy should stand by itself rather than be dependent upon whether it pleases the gods or not, or if they even care at all. He states, suppose the gods take counsel about none of our concerns. I am able to be able to take counsel about myself. So the whole point is that let's just see me for a few moments. So the whole point is, why do we need the gods to be good or God to be good to check our behavior? Cannot we be just good in and of ourselves through self-examination? Can't we strive to be a junsi, as they say in Japanese, can we be somebody who is of good repute? Can't we just strive to do that without having threats, fear to keep us in line? Is that a real motivation? He saw fear as no true motivation to be really good. It just, you're forced to act like you're good, but you're not good. To be good is to be good without a threat, because if you need a threat, then you are not good. You got that? You're not good at all. And that's his perspective, he says. For Marcus, one should always be true to who one is once one learns one's identity through philosophical inquiry. And once knowing this, one should never betray oneself, stating, quote, never regard something as doing you good if it makes you betray a trust or lose your sense of shame or make you show hatred, suspicion, ill will, or hypocrisy, or desire for things best done behind closed doors. He's saying, what? This is important. I want to read that one more time. Never regard something as doing you good if it makes you betray a trust or lose your sense of shame or makes you show hatred, suspicion, ill will, or hypocrisy. Think about that. It's not good if it makes you do things that is bad. And that includes, of course, not only motivations within yourself, but motivations outside of yourself. If something, a habit, a hobby, an idea, a belief, a political belief, a religious belief, that you say is good, but it makes you do things that are terrible, that make you betray or hypocrisy or suspicion or hatred, then it is not good. Even when it comes to political perspectives, even when it includes to allegiance to political figures. If that political figure makes you say that person is good, but it makes you a very bad person full of hatred, then that is not good. That's the opposite of good. And of course, for Stoics, that is evil. Got it? You guys get it? You see now you understand Stoicism. Everything I'm saying here makes more sense, does it not? Marcus Aurelius is a quintessential philosopher. Better still, he is a quintessential Stoic philosopher, right down to every aspect of his life. And he applied it to an emperor during a terrible time. During his campaigns along the Danube and the Eastern Europe in general, Marcus Aurelius took time to contemplate life and his philosophy by writing these books. So he's in the middle of war. He's sitting in his tent and he's writing these words as the barbarians are outside, as they're attacking his forces. This is during a time of not of peace, it's a time of conflict. And yet these words are about the sense of serenity, the sense of compassion, this centeredness, this calmness that radiates from his character. And he has that in spades. Now, of course, obviously the focus of the meditations is contemplation of oneself and how one relates to others in the universe. At one point, he declares, you have the power to strip away many superfluous troubles located wholly in your judgment, and to possess a large room for yourself, embracing in thought the whole of the cosmos, to consider everlasting time, to think of the rapid change in the parts of each thing, of how short it is from birth until dissolution, and how the void before birth and that after dissolution are equally infinite. Of course, is the idea of the impermanence of the world, that it grows, it's born, it grows, but it also will be destroyed in the end, and then, of course, go back again. And yet, I like something here about it. I love it, in fact. The idea is to strip away these troubles and to possess a large room for yourself, embracing in thought the whole of the cosmos. You see here this beautiful visual display of where what he's doing, in a sense, is all the discord that he has going on in his mind. He's creating this room within himself, in his mind, that's of peace, of repose, in which the whole universe is there. I love that. This realm, this bigger idea than just simply the mundane here and now. He's thinking about the transcendence of his being and connection to all things. The perspective gained is that all of us arrive from nature, and all of us, of course, are going to return, right? And not a very long time, because life is pretty fleeting. Therefore, the point of life is to live it well in the here and now, not thinking too far in the future, but making the best of the quality and trying our best to be, quote, a good person. Be a good person. Here's a few quotes that I'm going to conclude with. He says, for the meditations, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, so this is what you're supposed to do when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, quote, this is your mantra. And apparently, obviously, he said this in the morning. Tell yourself, quote, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surely. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but of the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine, unquote. So the idea is, but we're still human. And as terrible as they are, we have the capability of being as terrible. We could be the same way. We strive to be better. They don't. But at the same time, we are all human, and we are all susceptible to this. So let's not judge others. Let's judge ourselves. Do our own mental inventory of ourselves to better ourselves, and don't always focus on other people. Focus on you, not others. Beautiful. Another one. Words that everyone, he says, words that everyone once used are now obsolete. And so are the men whose names were once on everyone's lips. Camillus, Caeso, Valesius, Donatus, and to a lesser degree, Scipio and Cato, and yes, even Augustus, Hadrian, Antonius, are less spoken of now than they were in their own days. For all things fade away, become the stuff of legend, and are soon buried in oblivion. Mind you, this is true only for those who blazed once like bright stars in the firmament, but for the rest, as soon as a few clods of earth cover their corpses, they are out of sight, out of mind. The saying comes from, right? In the end, what would you gain from everlasting remembrance? Absolutely nothing. So what is left worth living for? This alone: justice in thought, goodness in action, speech that cannot deceive, and a disposition glad of whatever comes, welcoming it as necessary, as familiar, as flowing from the same source and fountain as yourself. Same source and fountain as your source. So justice in thought, goodness in action, speech that cannot deceive, and disposition glad of whatever comes, welcome necessary as familiar. This is beautiful words. He continues, another saying, he's almost done. He says, be like a rocky promontory against which the restless surf continually pounds. It stands fast while the churning sea is lulled to sleep at its feet. It would be a mighty strong rock, right? And he says, I hear you say, how unlucky that this should happen to me. Not at all. Say instead, how lucky that I am not broken by what has happened and am not afraid of what is about to happen. The same blow might have struck anyone, but not many would have absorbed it so well without capitulation or complaint. Be that strong. Yes, eventually the sea is going to get that rock, but be happy for how long it lasted. Happy, don't always worry about that. Be happy where you're at. He says, why do you hunger for a length of days? The point of life is to follow reason and the divine spirit and to accept whatever nature sends you. To live in this way is not to fear death, but to behold it in contempt. Death is only a thing of terror for those unable to live in the present. Anyway, death is only a thing of terror for those unable to live in the present. Pass on your way then with a smiling face under the smile of him who bids you go. Do not consider life a thing of any value, for look at the immensity of time behind thee and to the time which is before thee, another boundless space. In this infinity, then, what is the difference between him who lives 3 days and him who lives 3 generations? Wow. So he's just okay. Now, whatever happens to you has been waiting to happen since the beginning of time. This is the idea connected to fate. The twining strands of fate wove both of them together, your own existence and the things that happened to you. And of course, obviously, all things are interwoven with one another. A second bond unites them. There is scarcely one thing that is isolated from another. Everything is coordinated. Everything works together in giving form to one universe. The world order is a unity made up of a multiplicity. God is one, pervading all things. All being is one. All law is one, namely the common reason which all thinking persons possess. And all truth is one, if, as we believe, there can be but one path to perfection for beings that are alike in kind and reason. So for him, of course, there's one way, but not one way. It's a multiplicity of ways. It's a manner of life. And if you have a multiplicity of emanations of different ways, but there still is underlying it this idea of one truth. Great words. But what happens in the end? I wish that it was a happy ending. But he dies, of course. That's not the unhappy ending. Concerning his death, Dio states, now if Marcus had lived longer, he would have subdued the entire region, but as it was, he passed away on the 17th of March. Now some, according to Dio, blame Commodus as accelerating his death or killing him. Others say, no, it's not. This is a matter of controversy. His own son, though, is a problematic figure. His last words were to a military tribune who asked him for the watchword, and he said, go to the rising sun. I am already setting. After his death, he received many marks of honor, amongst them a gold statue and other kinds. And of course, unfortunately, then Commodus becomes emperor. He turned the empire's fortunes, his son. Unfortunately, because the Roman administration was so focused upon the person of the emperor since Augustus as a representative of the people, princeps, head of the military imperator, and overseeing the state religion, Pontifex Maximus, any flaw, any vice was instantly felt by those within government circles, and it trickled down onto the people in general as well. And two of Commodus's greatest vices were greed and suspicion. So while this idea of Marcus Aurelius, who was such a great virtuous man, it didn't matter because his whole idea was about justice and temperance and wisdom and courage. But now you have Commodus who cares nothing about that. And the problem is it had too strong a leadership. It is most telling that Dio Cassius, a contemporary observer of the period and historian during the time of Commodus as emperor, marked the descent from the kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. Commodus remained with the Danube armies for a little while, but then he returned to Rome, celebrated a triumph at the conclusion of the wars. Unlike the preceding emperors, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, he seemed to have very little interest in the business of administration, intended throughout his reign to leave the practical running of the state to his favorites, various freedmen and everything else. While the Senate loathed him, the evidence suggests that he remained popular with the army, and the common people liked him too, not least because he had lavish shows. Unlike Marcus Aurelius, who was very restrained when it came to entertainments, Commodus was all about a great show, bread and circuses, and they loved it. They want to be entertained. So he staged many spectacular gladiatorial combats. In fact, he trained himself as a gladiator. You can't make this up. He had images of himself as a gladiator and himself fought in the arena. Unbelievable. So yeah. Now, Christians liked him. They thought he was a good emperor. Because persecutions absolutely stopped during this time. In fact, he had a concubine or mistress that basically worked on behalf of Christians to alleviate any kinds of troubles amongst them. So there you have it. Also Marcius, of course, that was her. Now, finally, of course, people had enough. And so what happened is he was, what we have is his plot was formed against him and to replace Commodus with Pertinax. And so what happened is Marcia, his Christian concubine, maybe, poisoned him, poisoned his food, but he vomited up the poison. Not ready to give up, the conspirators next sent his wrestling partner, Narcissus, to strangle him in his bath. Upon his death, the Senate declared him public enemy and restored the original name of the city of Rome because he named it after himself. Following his death, Pertinax, acclaimed was emperor. He attempted to institute severe reforms, but then, of course, eventually there's a conflict and he was killed, Praetorian guards. After his death, of course, a wealthy senator by the name of Didius Julianus becomes emperor, and what he does is he decreases the silver purity of the denarii makes it worse. And people hate him, call him a person who stole the emperorship, and then he's killed. And then, of course, Septimius Severus is the next one who comes, who's going to create a new legacy, a new dynasty. And so what will happen, I'll bring this under Septimius Severus, is you're going to have now all of a sudden a rise in fortunes again. So things do go well again. So this is a terrible hiccup, but it is not the fall of Rome under Commodus. It's a terrible period of time to a certain extent, to many, but for others, not so much, right? And Septimius Severus proved himself a strong emperor. Still, that strength, in many ways, is connected to the fact that Marcus Aurelius held the empire together under his rule. Does that make sense? And he will later even use, he'll reuse the infrastructure and the ideas that Marcus Aurelius also, continued on for the very good emperors. Even though during the time of Commodus, you have this period of repose where you let things go, still there's going to be a rejuvenation. But then again, I don't think this would be possible if it wasn't for Marcus Aurelius, because Marcus Aurelius, through his leadership, held the Roman Empire together during the most difficult of times, during a period of time, as I mentioned, of war on two fronts, of a major bloodthirsty rebellion in Egypt, of a civil war, and of course, a bubonic plague that reduced the cities and population like you cannot believe. It was the worst of times, and yet within Marcus Aurelius himself, it was the best of times within his own beliefs, his own perspectives, because I have to say this, it is his philosophy, it is his ideas that held the empire strong. Marcus Aurelius is nothing but the consummate genius through the fortitude of his abilities that forged a empire that will last for centuries to come. And as I say once more, get up in the morning and say his mantra, be not ungrateful, right? Don't worry about those uncharitable men, right? The thing is that we are all humans. We all share the same bonds, and maybe we need to look at each other that way. Maybe we need to look across the aisle, have those conversations, and look into people's eyes and realize that we do share this in common. We have more in common than we have in difference. If Marcus Aurelius is able to do it, maybe we can too. Thank you so much. Have a great night.